listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. My name is John Laffey. I'm the Technical Manager here at Perry Johnson Registrars. I'm in charge of the Information Security Management System program. And today we're going to be talking about determining the scope of your Information Security Management System, or ISMS, as I will refer to it from here on out, because it has a lot of syllables. Just take another minute or so here, make sure everybody can get in front of their computers, and we'll get started at 11. Okay, here we go. Thank you all for joining me. Just a couple quick notes here before we get started. All participants have been muted, but please, throughout the presentation, as you have questions, go ahead and use that question section of the little applet that GoToWebinar provides. And at the end of the session, I will do my best to answer as many or all questions as possible, as best as I can. Shortly after the presentation today, it will be available for download from our website, so you can grab that for your archives at pjr.com and take a look under previously recorded webinars, and it should be up there probably a half hour to an hour after we conclude here today. Shouldn't take too much of your time today. It's I know we're all busy, so I try and be as brief as possible and still provide some value. A quick look at what we're going to be talking about today. Just a brief overview of the standard and what the purpose of defining the scope of your ISMS is. We'll talk about who and what to consider when determining your ISMS's scope. Give you some strategies that may help determine and define the scope and boundaries of your ISMS, and just some thoughts as far as if you're going, or if you're considering narrowing the scope of your ISMS from your entire organization or all of its processes. Just some things to keep in mind. And again, please go ahead and use that question section throughout the presentation as you think of them, and I will follow up as we conclude here today. A brief overview on ISO 27001. The 2013 revision is the current revision as of today. It's a standard published by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO. It provides a framework for the planning, implementation, and continual improvement of an information security management system. If you have any familiarity with any other ISO standards, such as 9001 for quality, or there's a ton of environmental, whatever the case may be, a lot of the core components, such as continual improvement, internal audits, management reviews, that are found in those standards are also found here. So there may be some familiarity there for you if you have any experience with those. What kind of sets ISO 27001 apart is it contains an annex known as Annex A, and it lists several control objectives and related controls to meet those objectives, that it's required that you take a look at those during your risk assessment and see if there isn't a chance that those controls could help mitigate any risk that you've identified. Now you can also go above and beyond any of the controls that are listed there. Those would just be the minimum number of controls that need to be looked at, and in going through that process you end up generating what is known in the standard as a statement of applicability, which basically just delineates which controls have been selected, how they're implemented, and why you chose to implement them. ISO 27001 is the only internationally recognized standard in information security. that is certifiable to by a third party, and it will definitely provide assurance to customers and partners in your organization's dedication to information security. On top of that, it's also going to provide a lot of benefits internally, just best practices, having procedures, and formalized processes in place to deal with a litany of the risks and threats that a company doing business in today's world. So we'll get into the purpose of a formal scope definition, and basically it serves the purpose of stating exactly what it is that an organization does that is certified to be effectively controlled by the requirements of the standard. Without a formal scope definition, the statement of an organization being certified to ISO 27001 could mean a lot or not much at all. The scope statement should state exactly what it is that an organization does that is certified to the standard. This could be the development of software, it could be providing third-party services, it could be something that you wouldn't normally associate with information security. It could be something in the manufacturing world, but if you have clients and there's proprietary information that's exchanging hands and in your custody for a period of time, it could definitely be expected that they want to make sure that information is not going to get into the wrong hands or disclosed to anyone it shouldn't be. To give an example of a poor scope statement, XYZ company, this is fictional, so if there is an XYZ company, this is not meant to implicate them, but XYZ company's information security system. It provides no details as to what products or services the company provides that is found to meet the standards requirements. So again, it could mean there's a very robust system and that everything the organization handles is effectively secured, or it could mean next to nothing if it's just for, say, a single office clerk. So it doesn't do the job of getting those details across. A better example would be the development, operation, and administration of the scheduling and planning software as a service platform provided by company XYZ. It tells us that the fictional organization has been certified in not just the operation and administration of its SaaS platform, but also the development of well. So that helps paint a better picture of exactly what's included and what's subject to the requirements of the standard. This also means that the people and systems associated with the development, operation, and administration of the system are in scope and need to meet the requirements of the standard as well. In the event that this company also provided other services such as consulting, there should be no confusion or assumption that this separate service meets the requirements of the standard, as it is not documented in the formal scope and wouldn't have been subject to the certification audit. So again, it can also provide some insight for interested parties or potential customers as to exactly, if a company is certified, exactly what that means. Who and what to consider when deciding on scope. The first thing, and the standard goes into this some too, but it talks about understanding your organization and the issues that are most relevant to it, as well as the needs and expectations of people and organizations who have the most interest in it. Please note that the requirements of people and organizations interested in your company should include any legal or regulatory requirements your organization are subject to as well. As an example, if your company provides financial consulting, it would make sense to ensure that the people, processes, systems, and information involved with your client's data is in scope. It would also make sense to ensure that your company is not in any violation of any laws or regulations specific to financial consulting or to the countries, regions, states, counties, etc. that you operate your business in. It would not make sense for the same business to have a scope that only includes their sales department, who do not have access to or influence on any customer data or its security. And so in summary, you want to be sure that you are meeting the requirements and expectations of those who have the most influence on the ability of your organization to reach its overall goals and objectives. There should be a value add not only for the organization, but also for those folks who, are potential clients or business partners. As far as strategies for determining and defining the boundaries of your ISMS, after considering the details and parties most relevant to your organization and its goals, you should have a good idea of what information should be within the scope of your system. That's to say, if after consulting or discussing or reaching out to those folks that you currently do business with or who are interested in doing business with you, you ascertain what it is exactly that they expect in terms of information security. It should paint a pretty good picture for what exactly is going to need to be able to be brought into scope for you. After determining that, the boundaries of the ISMS must be laid down, and which can be thought of as a perimeter serving as a demarcation point between a trusted controlled environment, so that would be everything within the scope, and the outside world. And we'll get into this more in a few slides ahead, but depending on how you determine that boundary and scope of your system, the outside world could actually include folks within your organization if they've been excluded from the scope. So that's something we'll talk a little bit more on, but it's definitely something to keep in mind at the early stages of the planning here as far as what the scope is going to include for your ISMS. In many cases, the easiest and safest way to determine your boundaries is to just include everything. All the people, processes, systems, physical locations, just bring them all in. For smaller organizations with a single office or a few offices, or those only offering a single product or service, this will most likely be the least resource-intensive approach to take. Reason being is, again, some of the steps you'll have to go through in order to mitigate risks from excluding certain parts of your organization is actually going to entail doing a lot more work than just bringing them into the fold in the first place. Again, in this example, determining the people and processes to be included is very straightforward, as it would be everyone and all processes of the organization. Similarly, the physical perimeter of your location or locations are also easily identifiable. And then as far as determining the logical boundaries for your data network, this can be aided by kind of identifying where the demarcation points for entry and exit exist, or where your organization has control and visibility of the network and where it does not. So where can you, exert your requirements and policies on the folks who are accessing your network, and at what point does that end? Sometimes it can be multiple, sometimes it's just going to be a single WAN connection. Obviously, networks can vary in complexity and scale greatly, so it's going to depend on your organization. But again, if you're including everything, this whole process is going to be a lot simpler because you're probably going to be very aware of where those points exist already. As far as organizations that decide they want to limit the scope of their ISMS, which in some cases is a very viable approach to take if it's a very large, diverse organization that, provides many different types of services and goods, with thousands of employees. It could just be a bit too overwhelming and a bit too much, resource cost-wise to lay all that out from the very beginning. So sometimes it makes sense to kind of start a little smaller, build up the core of your ISMS, which can extend as you expand your scope, in a smaller scale, go through the process of refining it and getting it up to snuff and getting certified and feeling confident about it, and then, rolling it out in a more layered approach. One strategy here is an organizational chart may easily identify the departments or people involved, in this case with a specific product or service that is going to be in scope. Again, if there are individuals that are out of scope but occupy the same offices or physical locations, they will have to be treated the same as any other person outside the scope, which is to say, the uncontrolled environment. So as a means to effectively mitigate those risks, you may have to install separate physical areas or secured access ways to only allow in-scope personnel access. You may have to have separate informational systems or separate information systems, be it physically or logically. You may have to have contracts in place to have some contractual obligations that delimit, what the requirements are between the in-scope and out-of-scope personnel, divisions, departments, etc., to enforce those requirements. As a general rule of thumb, any physical location or locations that are owned by the organization seeking certification where in-scope personnel work from, or that are involved with the data and systems used for the in-scope good or service will need to be included in the scope. The key part there is locations that are owned by the same organization seeking certification. Obviously, we run into this all the time. Hosted environments, Amazon, Microsoft, any number of other providers of hosted compute space, because they're not owned by the organization seeking certification. What we typically look for are the contractual requirements and obligations that have been put into place in the agreements by the organization and that hosted provider, but it's not going to be practical, or I don't even know possible, for us to determine at any given time, let's say for a fictional company using Amazon's hosted services, what physical data centers those current environments are being hosted in, let alone convincing Amazon to provide us access to these data centers in order to take a look around and verify controls in place. So when it's a third party, we're typically going to look to contractual or any other means of controls that are in place. In this slide here, I'm just kind of delineating a strategy that, honestly, it's something that I've thought about at length, and it kind of made sense to me, just as far as making sure you're not missing anything when it comes to determining what exactly needs to be brought into scope from a personnel, from a location, from a process, and from a systems point of view. And that's to create a high-level kind of data flow chart that just shows a logical mapping of the data that's to be brought in scope. During this process, it's not necessary to identify each unique server, router, switch, storage array, etc. Feel free, you can at this point. You're going to want to have all that information before you complete your implementation of the system. But if you have 27 database servers in geographically diverse locations where this in-scope data could end up, just identifying database servers as a single point on the map will cue you to, when you go back and look at this high-level map, you can then drill down on each individual, system or infrastructure point, whatever the case may be, and basically you can, as you go through that process, identify the physical locations in which they reside, the departments or personnel who interact with them, who have access to them, etc. I say here to start with all the possible ways the data enters your systems or buildings and all the potential places it will go to be stored, processed, or archived, as well as all possible exit points. And keep in mind to take note of the possible ways it can get between these locations, whether it be electronic format, over the internet, over VPNs, over, private point-to-point connections, whatever the case may be, and thinking all the way to, in our organization, are we allowing this information to be put in printed medium and actually physically carried off-site in between locations to employees' homes? These are all the kind of things that need to be considered. After you have this high-level map, you can go back and drill down again, like I was saying before, on each of those items or points on the map there, and enumerate all those individual resources to come up with a comprehensive list of the systems that would need to be brought into scope. working with these list of systems, you can then identify the physical locations they reside in, the methods of transport between them, be it electronic or a physical medium, and the personnel with access to them. Again, this is not the only method. It may not be the best method for your specific situation. It's just kind of an exercise I've gone through myself and thought that it could be helpful because I know it can be very overwhelming at the onset, especially for more established organizations with, you know, several complex, diverse systems. You know, it can get a little blurry as far as what systems are actually in use and how it gets between them, all the possible ways it can get between them, etc. Scoping for success. The potential benefits and pitfalls of narrowing your scope. So I think earlier I mentioned, you know, for some organizations it can be beneficial to narrow the scope if it's just too much of a task to try and roll it out, you know, globally for them at the onset. It can reduce its initial cost and resources, or again, as I mentioned, potentially increase it. Rolling it out to a single location may certainly be less daunting than implementing it multiple, but due to the ease with which data networks can cross organizational and geographical boundaries, it may not be realistic. So again, I would suggest that you first determine what it is that your organization does that would have the greatest benefit, you know, by those interested parties that we talked about before, from being controlled and certified to ISO 27001, and then working from there to identify the people, processes, systems, and data that are involved in it. And that would be as opposed to identifying the easiest or least costly scope for implementing an ISMS in order to just get a certificate. Because again, if it doesn't provide value for you internally and it doesn't provide value for your customers, then it could just be, you know, a waste of time and money. The feasibility and sensibility of limiting the scope, of course, will depend on the specifics of your organization and its context. But again, the key point to remember is that with limited scope, organizational assets outside of the scope must be treated the same as those external to your company. All right. So that concludes this presentation. I got the questions panel expanded now, so please, at this time, if you have any questions regarding scope or just ISO 27001 in general, I'd be more than happy to field and answer them as best as I can. So now is the time. And I'll go ahead and keep this broadcast live here for about the next, 5 or 10 minutes. See if we do get some questions rolling in here. If not, I'd just like to point out that if you have some further information, or if you require some further information, or have some questions that you'd rather ask offline, you can call us at 800-800-7910, or you can contact me directly at jlaffey@pjr.com. All that contact information should be up on your screen right now. Let's see. Oh. Well, Jenny, I definitely appreciate that. I hope it was informative, and I certainly appreciate you attending. And please feel free. Reach out to us, reach out to me. You know, information security, obviously, there's, you know, it's not in the shadows anymore. You hear about security breaches all the time, unfortunately. And typically it's after something pretty catastrophic has happened. So I think there's no question about its importance, and I certainly feel that ISO 27001 does a great job of giving you a framework to build a comprehensive information security system around, you know, without being too prescriptive in exactly what systems or software or firewalls need to be implemented, because quite frankly, it would all be outdated and probably wrong information by the time it got published with how fast things change. So All right, here we go. Phyllis. We are a non-federal company required to put NIST 800-171 in place by 12/31/17. How do we entwine this with ISO 27001? Well, Phyllis, a key component of ISO 27001 is, again, identifying and being in compliance with any regulatory or statutory requirements or contractual requirements. I'm not sure the exact nature of your organization and where this requirement is coming from, but chances are it would fall into one of those. So, you know, you would certainly need to do that. And as far as it conflicting with any of the requirements of ISO 27001, I can't imagine that would be the case. I have to be careful. I can't really provide any consulting type specific responses here, but again, I don't see how the requirements of NIST would in any way affect your ability to become ISO 27001 certified. Again, apologizing for not being able to provide too specific of guidance on how to entwine this requirement with 27001. You know, I would just say that it could be something that's identified on your risk assessment, you know, with whatever you're doing to ensure the requirements of NIST 800, what was it, 717? Sorry, my question panel here keeps minimizing on me. 171, you know, it could be an identified risk that has to be mitigated, and whatever you're doing in order to ensure those requirements are being met, you could reference there. There would just be additional controls, or perhaps there's already control categories and control objectives in place in the standard itself that would speak to all the requirements of that specific guidance document. Okay, follow-up question here again from Phyllis. Should we become ISO 27001 at the same time, or implement NIST and then move towards 27001 in the near future? Well, honestly, Phyllis, it might be a great time to do both. Again, I definitely see them being complementary, or, you know, definitely not in conflict of one another. So if there is an identified, you know, obviously need by top management, and they're going to be putting the resources in place in order to get this done, it might be a great time to go ahead and expand that into putting a formal ISMS in place. It's not required. ISO 27001 right now is not required by any statutory or regulatory language that I'm currently aware of in this country, but I do know that for companies that do contract work with the government, it certainly provides them some benefit from a competitive advantage point of view in winning on those bids they put in. So. All right, Phyllis, another one. Can I merge my current QMS with ISO 27001? How will this impact the audit? Do we need separate policies for quality versus security? Great question. So ISO 27001 and ISO 9001 can definitely be integrated together. I've seen them as two standalone systems. So, I haven't seen it, in my particular experience, a company with a fully integrated set of procedures, manuals, documents, records, etc. Simply because it was the 9001 was in place and 27001 was added later. But I will say there is a lot of common requirements, as I discussed earlier, as far as internal audits, as far as management reviews, things of that nature. And you certainly can use what you already have, and just revising it to reference the ISO 27001 standard as necessary, or you can go ahead and write a whole integrated doc that covers both and the requirements from both, and whichever way they differ on those common elements. You certainly, your information security policy as opposed to your quality policy, I would expect them to be different, just because the overall content of what they're speaking to is typically going to be different, unless maybe you're an information security consulting firm. So in that case, there may be some overlap in the policies, but obviously quality is going to speak more towards just providing the whatever it is, good or service, from that point of view of quality, where information security is going to be talking about achieving those. And obviously I would expect to see different objectives for each, but they certainly, ISO in its most recent revisions, going to Annex SL, which is kind of a standardized 10-clause format, and trying to line up the common elements across the different standards that they publish as well as they can. They've certainly put some things into place to make it easier for companies to integrate multiple management systems. And I'm aware of companies that have 9,000, 14,000, 18,000, 27,000. So there's companies out there who are managing 4 and 5 management systems from ISO, and they certainly do go hand in hand. As far as how will it impact the audit, it's going to add some time. What the auditor is going to be looking for with 27001, it's typically a little bit more time intensive. But on the other side of that, if you do have an integrated system, you can also realize a benefit and reduce total audit time. There are some deductions that certification bodies can take if organizations are already certified to another ISO standard and things of that nature, and have just a familiarity with ISO standards in general. I hope that was helpful. All right, fill this again. To show scope on QMS, I have built a business cycle model that shows our scope for 27001. Should I use the same model and just build a security layer over it? Also, I use quality process maps. Is it advisable to use process maps for 27001, or better to use Word format policies and procedures? Again, Phyllis, I gotta kind of be careful here. I don't want anything that I'm saying to be misconstrued as consulting. And to be quite honest, I'm not exactly certain what you mean by business cycle model that shows the scope. But if your QMS scope, includes the kind of core goods and services you provide to your clients, I would think that it would be beneficial for your ISMS scope to cover those same type of things. Going back to what we discussed during the presentation, again, you want to be able to scope your ISMS in a way that it's going to provide value for both the organization and for its clients. So I would say there's a good chance that the scope would be very similar across the two. As far as quality process maps and using process maps for 27001, it's going to completely depend on the specifics of your organization and your resources. If these are something that you're comfortable and familiar with and feel that they can be used in order to document and depict what's required in the standard, You know, far be it for me to say not to use them. But as far as if it's better to use a Word format policy and procedure, you know, it's impossible for me to say. It really just depends on what the needs of the organization are, and you know, as an auditor, it's our job to come in with an open mind. You know, a lot of what's in the standard, again, isn't very prescriptive, so it does enable organizations to use various methods and you know, mechanisms and systems, etc., to achieve the requirements. So if it works for you and it meets the requirements of the standard, you know, I would say go for it. Um, Oh, my pleasure, Phyllis. And I think I missed a question here from Mike. I was unable to get the webinar download to work. When will the PowerPoint be available to view? I will check with our marketing group here, Mike. I believe in about an hour or so, but if you'd like, if you want to give me an email address that I can get back to you at, I'll certainly get a solid answer from them on that, and I'd be happy to send it your way as soon as I have it. Okay, Mike? Not a problem. I got your email address right here, and I'll be sure to get that answer to you as soon as I have it. All right, everybody. Well, seems like the questions have tapered off here, so if that's all you have for today, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Once again, I'd just like to thank you all for joining. I hope it was informative and beneficial to you, and please don't hesitate if you have any more questions or are interested in more information. Again, give us a call, 800-800-7910. You can reach out to me directly at jlaffey@pjr.com or come visit our website. It's www.pjr.com. Thank you, folks, and you all have a great day.